After our family reunion dinner, I checked my bank account and saw it was completely drained. My brother-in-law snorted and said they needed the money more than I did. Trembling, I reached for my bag and said they would not mind what was coming next. As they laughed, a loud bang shook the house. The front door flew open and heavily armed agents stormed the room. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The scent of roasted garlic and rosemary filled the kitchen of my parents' sprawling Atlanta estate. I was standing over the marble island, carefully arranging prosciutto and fig crostini on a silver platter for their extravagant 40th anniversary party. Smooth jazz floated through the built-in ceiling speakers, mingling with the sound of clinking crystal from the living room. I wiped my hands on my apron, exhausted, but accustomed to my role as the family workhorse. Just as I reached for another fig, my phone vibrated violently against the granite countertop. It was an urgent alert from Chase Bank. I swiped the screen open, expecting a routine fraud check for a grocery run. Instead, the notification made my blood run cold. A sum of $350,000 had just been transferred out of my secure account. The destination was listed as an offshore fiduciary fund based in the Cayman Islands. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my professional instincts instantly kicked in. I did not panic. I analyzed. There was only one person currently sitting in the living room who had asked to borrow my laptop 10 minutes ago, under the guise of needing to check an urgent work email. I untied my apron, tossed it onto the counter, and walked down the long, dimly lit hallway toward the living room. The atmosphere in the house was thick with the kind of pretentious wealth my parents loved to project to their affluent social circle. As I stepped into the room, the scene before me was picture-perfect in its toxicity. My father Marcus was standing by the fireplace swirling an expensive aged scotch in his custom crystal tumbler. My mother Denise was sitting on the velvet love seat fawning over my older sister Chloe. Chloe, the undeniable golden child of the family, and a proud Spelman alumna, was flashing a new diamond tennis bracelet, basking in our mother's endless adoration. And then there was Trent. My white brother-in-law lounged on the center sofa like he owned the entire property. He had one ankle casually resting on his knee, his expensive Italian leather shoes dangerously close to my mother's pristine upholstery. In his lap rested my silver laptop. A thick, unlit cigar hung loosely from his lips as he tapped away at my keyboard with a smug, self-satisfied expression. "What exactly are you doing with my computer, Trent?" I asked, my voice cutting cleanly through the soft jazz music playing in the background. Trent paused his typing. He did not look guilty. He did not even flinch. He slowly closed the lid of my laptop and looked up at me with a condescending grin that made my stomach churn. "Just checking my emails, Maya," he drawled, leaning back and stretching his arms across the back of the sofa. "And while I was at it, I noticed you left your banking tab open. I took the liberty of doing you a massive favor." "A favor," I echoed, stepping closer to the coffee table. "You mean transferring $350,000 of my money to a Cayman Islands account?" The room suddenly went entirely still. The jazz music seemed to fade into a hollow buzz. Chloe stopped admiring her bracelet and looked up. My mother froze, her hand still hovering over Chloe's wrist. Trent simply chuckled, a low, grating sound that vibrated with unearned arrogance. "Look at you getting all worked up over basic wealth management. You had over 300 grand just sitting in a checking account collecting dust like a financial amateur. I am a wealth manager, Maya. I know how to make money work. I rolled your stagnant funds into my high-yield offshore portfolio. You are welcome, by the way." I stared at him, taking in the sheer brazen audacity of his words. He had just admitted to wire fraud right in front of my family, framing it as a charitable act. "That is my money, Trent," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "You did not ask for my permission. You bypassed my security, accessed my funds, and initiated an unauthorized international wire transfer. That is a federal crime." Trent rolled his eyes and scoffed loudly. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. Federal crime. Please, you are family. Besides, what does a low-level bookkeeper like you even need with that kind of liquidity? You live in a rented apartment and wear department store clothes. Chloe and I are expanding our investments. We are closing on a spectacular summer home in the Hamptons next week, and we needed to show more liquid assets to finalize the backing. I am putting your dead money to actual use. Chloe quickly chimed in, her voice dripping with the same superiority she had wielded over me since childhood. Trent is right, Maya. You should actually be thanking him. He is an investment genius. You do not understand how these things work because you dropped out of college. You just sit at a desk checking spreadsheets all day. Trent is helping you build generational wealth. When the Hamptons property appreciates, maybe we will let you stay in the guest house for a weekend. I looked at my sister, marveling at how smoothly she defended her husband's blatant theft. This was the dynamic I had endured my entire life. Chloe was the star, the beautiful, successful daughter who married the wealthy Wall Street broker. I was the dropout, the disappointment, the one who quietly fixed everything in the background while they paraded around claiming all the glory. I turned my gaze to my parents, expecting at least a shred of parental protection. But my father, Marcus, simply sighed loudly and shook his head. He stepped forward, the ice clinking sharply against the glass in his hand. "Maya, lower your voice," my father reprimanded, pointing a stern finger at me. "You are making a scene and ruining my anniversary evening. Do you have any idea how much this scotch costs? I am trying to enjoy my night, and here you are acting like a hysterical child over nothing." "Over nothing," I repeated, genuinely astounded. "Dad, he just stole $350,000 from me." "He did not steal it," my father snapped, his voice booming with absolute authority. "He is managing it. Trent is a professional. He handles millions of dollars every single day. You know nothing about high-level finance. You should be grateful your brother-in-law is willing to look out for your financial future instead of letting you squander it on whatever it is you do in that tiny apartment of yours. Now go back to the kitchen and finish preparing the appetizers before our actual guests arrive. I will not have you embarrassing this family in front of my country club friends." I stood there in the center of the living room, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of their combined disdain. They genuinely believed I was nothing. They believed Trent, a man who threw around financial buzzwords to sound important, was untouchable. They believed my money was their money simply because I was the family scapegoat. What they did not know was that the laptop Trent had just used was heavily encrypted. What they did not know was that the $350,000 he had just wired out of the country did not actually belong to me. It belonged to the United States Treasury. And what Trent completely failed to realize was that I was not a low-level bookkeeper. I was a senior forensic auditor operating as a direct consultant for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and he had just swallowed a meticulously designed digital honeypot. I took a slow, deep breath, smoothing down the front of my simple dress. The anger that had initially spiked in my chest dissolved into a cold, clinical calm. "I see," I said softly, looking directly into Trent's smug, smiling face. "So you transferred those funds to your offshore account, and you have no intention of reversing the transaction." "Not a chance, sweetheart," Trent replied, pulling a gold lighter from his pocket and finally lighting his cigar. "The money is locked in. It is untraceable, secure, and completely out of your hands. Let the professionals handle the heavy lifting. Run along and check your little spreadsheets." I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply nodded, reached over the sofa and picked up my silver laptop. "Untraceable," I repeated, a genuine smile finally breaking across my face. "That is a very bold assumption, Trent." I opened the laptop screen, the bright light illuminating the sudden confusion flickering in his eyes. "Let us see how untraceable it really is." The bright light of the screen washed over my face. I let my shoulders drop a fraction of an inch, allowing a mask of utter defeat to slide over my features. It was a calculated display of vulnerability. From the corner of my eye, I watched the camera angle of my own reality shift perfectly over Trent's shoulder. His chest expanded, his posture relaxed. A wide, triumphant smile spread across his face, revealing those expensive veneers my parents probably helped finance. He honestly believed he had won. He believed he had successfully cowed the rebellious spinster sister back into her quiet corner. "Maya, close that computer right now," my mother demanded, her voice sharp and commanding as she stood up from the velvet love seat. Denise smoothed down the front of her designer evening gown and marched toward me. Her heels clicked sharply against the imported hardwood floors. "You are ruining your father's celebration with this absurd paranoia. Trent is doing you a massive favor, and you are standing here acting like a common criminal has broken into your house." "A common criminal is exactly what he is, Mom," I replied, my voice unwavering as my fingers hovered over the keyboard. "He took my money without asking. In the real world outside this country club fantasy you all live in, that is called grand larceny." My mother let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. She looked at me with the same potent mixture of pity and revulsion she had perfected over the last decade. "Do not talk to us about the real world, Maya. You have no idea how the real world operates. You play with basic spreadsheets for small local businesses. You balance checkbooks. You sit in a cramped apartment and wear clothes from last season. Trent is an executive on Wall Street. He is a financial visionary. He knows how capital works. He knows how to multiply wealth. You should be down on your knees thanking him for taking an interest in your pitiful savings." "It is $350,000, I stated, gripping the edge of the coffee table. "That is not a pitiful savings. That is my entire livelihood that he just wired out of the country." "And what exactly were you going to do with it?" Chloe interjected, swirling the champagne in her crystal flute. My older sister uncrossed her long legs and sighed heavily, looking at me as if I were a smudge on her pristine white rug. "Were you going to buy more comfortable sweaters? Were you going to save up for a slightly nicer Honda? Come on, Maya, be realistic. You are a single black woman with a high school diploma and a few community college credits. You do not have the network or the pedigree to handle that kind of liquidity. Trent does. Trent understands generational wealth." "Generational wealth," I repeated, staring at my sister. The sheer delusion in her voice was breathtaking. "You mean Trent understands how to steal from a black woman to fund his white privilege?" Trent bristled immediately, sitting up straighter on the sofa. "Now hold on a second, Maya. There is no need to bring race into this. I am colorblind when it comes to money. I treat your funds exactly how I treat my own family's funds. I am simply aggressive with my investment strategies." "Yes, he is aggressive," Chloe agreed quickly, stepping over to place a protective hand on her husband's shoulder. "We are trying to close on a spectacular summer estate in the Hamptons next week. It has private beach access and an infinity pool. All of Trent's senior partners summer there. It is absolutely crucial for his career trajectory that we secure this property. You leaving that kind of cash sitting stagnant in a checking account is basically a financial crime. We needed liquid assets to prove backing for the mortgage. You are family. Family helps family. When the property appreciates, we will obviously give you a return on your investment." "You are using my money as a slush fund for a Hamptons vacation house," I asked, my gaze darting between my sister and my mother. "And you are all perfectly fine with this. You are perfectly fine with him robbing me blind so you can pretend to be American royalty." My father Marcus slammed his hand down on the mantelpiece, making the framed family photographs rattle. "Enough," he bellowed, his face flushing a deep angry red. "We will not tolerate this disrespect in our home, Maya. Trent is the best thing that ever happened to this family finances. He navigates a world you could not even dream of entering. Ever since you dropped out of college, you have carried this massive chip on your shoulder. You resent your sister because she finished her degree at Spelman. You resent Trent because he is successful and confident. You are letting your petty jealousy destroy this family." I looked at the three of them. My father, the proud patriarch who worshipped the ground his white son-in-law walked on simply because it brought him proximity to a specific tier of elite society. My mother, the social climber, who would eagerly sacrifice her youngest daughter to maintain the illusion of absolute perfection. And Chloe, the golden child who believed she was inherently entitled to every resource I possessed. They had constructed a massive, impenetrable fortress of delusion. Trent was their savior. Trent was their golden ticket, and I was nothing but a convenient stepping stone meant to be crushed under their designer shoes. It really is tragic, Denise added, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper meant to convey maternal concern. You have always been so ungrateful, Maya. We gave you every opportunity. We paid for tutors, we tried to get you into the right sororities, and you threw it all away to become a glorified calculator. You do not understand how the market fluctuates. You do not understand asset protection. If you just listened to Trent, your life would not be such a constant struggle. I am not struggling, Mom, I said quietly. Oh, please, Chloe snorted. You drive a 5-year-old car, and you rent. Trent manages portfolios worth tens of millions. Do you honestly think he needs your little 300 grand? He is doing you a favor. The fact that you are threatening to call the police over a simple portfolio integration just proves how utterly uneducated you are. Trent smiled again, leaning back and taking a long, slow drag from his cigar. Let her vent, Chloe. It is intimidating for someone without a financial background to see that much money move that quickly. She will calm down once she sees the quarterly returns. He was so incredibly confident. He had hacked into my laptop, bypassed the standard security gateways, and executed a massive international wire transfer without breaking a sweat. He thought he was untouchable because he had done it 100 times before. He thought my parents would always shield him from any real consequences. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. The emotional manipulation they were trying to inflict on me bounced off an invisible armor I had spent the last decade forging. I slowly lifted my head and met my mother's gaze. Then I looked at my father. Finally, I locked eyes with Trent. You are right about one thing, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm whisper that instantly chilled the room. I do not play with basic spreadsheets. I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out my smartphone. With 2 swift taps, I mirrored my phone screen directly to the massive 85-inch smart television mounted above the fireplace. The jazz music cut out abruptly, replaced by the sharp digital ping of a highly secure connection establishing itself. Trent frowned, his cigar freezing halfway to his mouth. What are you doing, Maya? Turn the music back on. I ignored him. I tapped a heavily encrypted application on my phone screen. It did not have a standard banking logo. It did not display a cheerful corporate mascot. Instead, a stark gray screen appeared requiring a complex biometric scan. I pressed my thumb against the sensor. A loud mechanical unlocking sound echoed through the living room speakers. The screen on the television shifted, revealing a highly classified interface bearing the official seal of the United States Department of the Treasury. Red warning banners flashed across the top of the display, indicating an active trace protocol had been initiated. You assumed that was my personal savings account, Trent, I said, stepping away from the coffee table and crossing my arms over my chest. You assumed I was just a naive college dropout hoarding cash in a standard retail bank. My mother stepped back, her eyes darting nervously toward the television screen. What is this, Maya? What kind of trick are you playing? It is not a trick, Mom, I replied, my eyes never leaving Trent's suddenly paling face. The money Trent just transferred to the Cayman Islands did not belong to me. That checking account was a digital honeypot. It was a decoy account specifically loaded with federal funds and engineered with embedded tracking algorithms. Trent's jaw dropped. The cigar slipped from his fingers and tumbled onto the expensive velvet sofa, leaving a trail of gray ash. You just initiated an unauthorized wire transfer of United States government funds, I continued, my voice ringing with absolute authority. You did not steal my money, Trent. You just robbed the federal government. And that untraceable Cayman account of yours. It just got lit up like a Christmas tree on the FBI's primary surveillance grid. Let us see how your financial genius handles a federal indictment. The silence in the room stretched so tight it felt like a piano wire ready to snap. Trent stared at the massive television screen, the stark gray interface of the Treasury Department reflecting in his eyes. For a fraction of a second, the arrogant smirk melted off his face, replaced by a flash of genuine, unadulterated panic. His hand trembled slightly, dropping a cluster of gray ash onto his tailored trousers. Then he let out a harsh, barking laugh. He clapped his hands together, the sound echoing sharply against the vaulted ceilings. Wow, Trent said, wiping a fake tear from his eye. I have to admit, Maya, you really had me going there for a second. That is a fantastic graphic design trick. What did you do? Build a fake HTML page to scare me. I forgot you took a few community college classes before you dropped out. You almost look like a real federal agent. He reached for his tumbler of bourbon, taking a long, confident swallow. I am not bluffing, Trent, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute certainty. Reverse the wire. Now. If that money settles into your Cayman account, the automated tracking triggers a federal alert. You have exactly 3 minutes before this goes from a reversible error to a mandatory felony investigation. Oh, please, Chloe groaned, rolling her eyes so hard I thought she might lose her balance. Stop embarrassing yourself, Maya. You are acting like a lunatic. Trent is a certified broker. You are just a bitter, lonely woman trying to ruin our parents' anniversary because you cannot stand seeing us succeed. Call them, Trent challenged, slamming his glass down on the coffee table. The crystal rang out like a gunshot. He spread his arms wide, a gesture of absolute invincibility. I dare you. Pick up your phone and call the police. Let them show up here. Let them see a hysterical, jealous sister making up wild stories about federal funds because she does not understand basic wealth management. Call them right now, Maya. I have the best defense attorneys in the state on retainer. I did not hesitate. I pulled my phone from my pocket and unlocked the screen, my thumb hovering over my field director's direct line. Stop. My father lunged forward with a speed I had not seen him use in decades. Marcus grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. His face was pale, a stark contrast to his usual composed demeanor. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Dad, let go of me, I demanded, pulling my arm back. He just committed wire fraud. I am legally obligated to report this. You cannot call anyone. My father breathed heavily, his chest heaving under his custom-tailored suit. He looked at my mother, an expression of sheer terror passing between them. Denise had pressed her hands against her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. Marcus, do not let her make a scene, Denise whispered frantically, glancing toward the front windows as if she expected flashing red and blue lights to appear at any second. The neighbors will see. The country club board will find out. This is not about your precious country club reputation, I shot back, disgusted by their misplaced priorities. Your son-in-law is a thief. If Trent goes down, we all go down. My father shouted, the volume of his voice shocking the room back into silence. He released my wrist and took a shaky step backward, running a trembling hand over his face. I stared at him, my heart skipping a beat. What do you mean we all go down? Chloe looked away suddenly, finding the pattern of the rug fascinating. Trent simply crossed his arms, leaning back against the sofa with a look of supreme boredom, as if we were discussing the weather rather than criminal activity. What did you do, Dad? I pressed, stepping closer to him. The cold, clinical detachment I had maintained moments ago began to fracture. A dark, ugly suspicion clawed at the back of my mind. My father refused to look me in the eye. He stared at the fireplace, his jaw clenched tight. To get into Trent's exclusive investment tier, we needed more capital. We needed a minimum buy-in that we did not have in liquid cash. We wanted to secure our retirement. We wanted to help Chloe and Trent close on the Hamptons estate. Where did you get the capital? I asked, though my stomach was already twisting into painful knots. I knew their financial situation. I balanced their books for years before Trent took over. They were house-rich and cash-poor, drowning in the expenses required to maintain their elite social facade. We leveraged the assets, Denise said defensively, stepping up beside my father. She raised her chin, adopting her familiar posture of haughty defiance. It is what smart people do, Maya. We used our assets to generate more wealth. What assets? I demanded, my voice rising in volume. You have a second mortgage on this house. You leased the cars. What did you leverage? The brownstone, my father whispered the words, slipping out like a shameful confession. The air was violently sucked out of my lungs. My entire body went numb. I literally took a step back, unable to process the magnitude of what he had just admitted. The brownstone, the historic 3-story brick house in the heart of Atlanta. It had belonged to Big Mama, my great-grandmother. She had scrubbed floors on her hands and knees for wealthy white families in Buckhead just to afford the down payment in 1945. She had fought against redlining, against systemic racism, against a city that did not want black people owning property. She had paid off every single cent of that mortgage with her blood, sweat, and tears. That house was our anchor. It was the physical manifestation of our ancestral survival. When I was struggling, when my parents were too busy attending galas to notice my existence, Big Mama had sat with me on that wide wooden porch, teaching me how to read, teaching me my worth. When she passed away, she left the house to my parents free and clear, explicitly stating it was never to be sold. It was the only piece of true, unencumbered generational wealth this family possessed. "You mortgaged Big Mama's house," I stated, my voice shaking with a rage so profound it felt like poison in my veins. "You took the home she worked her entire life to secure, and you handed the deed over to Trent." "We did not hand it over," Denise argued, crossing her arms defensively. "We used it as collateral for a margin loan." Trent needed a physical asset to back the high-yield trades. "It is perfectly normal. The returns are going to be astronomical. We are going to double the value of that dusty old house in 6 months." "It is not a dusty old house," I yelled, the raw pain tearing through my throat. "It is our legacy. It is the only thing our ancestors left us. And you gambled it away to a man who just stole federal funds to buy a vacation home." Chloe stepped forward, her perfectly manicured hands resting on her hips. "Honestly, Maya, you are so deeply attached to the past. That house is practically falling apart. The plumbing is ancient, the neighborhood is gentrifying. Trent actually has a developer friend who wants to buy it and turn it into luxury condos. We are maximizing its potential. You should be happy we are moving forward instead of clinging to poverty." I stared at my sister, utterly revolted by her profound ignorance. She was wearing thousands of dollars in jewelry, standing in a multi-million-dollar estate, completely disconnected from the sacrifices that made her comfortable life possible. She was willingly handing over our history to a man who saw us as nothing more than a profitable resource to be exploited. My father looked on the floor, unable to meet my furious gaze. "If you call the authorities on Trent, they will freeze his entire firm. The margin loan will default. The bank will seize the brownstone by the end of the week. We will lose everything, Maya. The house, the investments, our reputation. You have to let the wire transfer go. We will pay you back eventually, I promise you." They were asking me to absorb a massive federal theft to risk my own career and freedom just to protect their reckless vanity and Trent's criminal enterprise. They had sacrificed our heritage, and now they demanded I sacrifice myself. Trent let out a loud, dramatic sigh, picking up his cigar from the sofa. He brushed a speck of ash off his immaculate trousers and looked at me with an expression of sheer, unadulterated contempt. He was no longer hiding behind the facade of a polite family member. The mask was completely gone. "This is exactly why your kind struggles to build real capital," Trent sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are too emotional. You cling to sentimental garbage instead of seeing the bigger picture. A house is a brick box, Maya. It is leverage. Nothing more." He took a step toward me, his pale eyes flashing with a predatory arrogance. He gestured dismissively toward my parents. "They made the smart play. They let me elevate them. You can stand there crying about your great-grandmother and her hard work all you want, but let us be brutally honest here. Your legacy is not worth a dime without me stepping in to fix it." Trent stood there practically vibrating with unearned superiority. Chloe stepped up right beside him, perfectly mirroring his arrogant posture. She crossed her arms, the diamonds on her wrist catching the light of the crystal chandelier overhead. Looking up at the two of them from where I stood near the coffee table, I felt a sudden suffocating pressure in the room. They had positioned themselves like monarchs passing judgment on a peasant. They loomed over me physically and emotionally, trying to force me into submission. I looked at my sister, waiting for a fraction of remorse, a sliver of guilt for what her husband had just said about our great-grandmother. But Chloe simply smiled, a thin, patronizing curve of her lips. "We actually anticipated you might react poorly to us helping you," Chloe said smoothly, her voice gliding over the tension in the room, like oil on water. She reached into her quilted leather tote bag, resting on the armchair next to her. She pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope and tossed it onto the glass coffee table between us. It landed with a heavy thud. "What is that?" I asked, staring at the stark white paper. "It is a comprehensive power of attorney," my father answered. Marcus stepped forward, aligning himself squarely behind Trent and Chloe, cementing their unified front against me. "We had Trent's legal team draft it yesterday afternoon. Trent is generously offering to step in and formally manage the rest of your assets, Maya. He is going to take control of your remaining checking balances, your savings, and your retirement accounts to ensure you do not make any irrational financial decisions out of pure spite." My breath hitched in my throat. The sheer terrifying scale of their greed settled over me like a heavy winter coat. They had not just hacked into my computer to steal $350,000. They had planned a complete financial takeover. They intended to strip me of every single penny I owned, legally binding me to Trent so they could drain my accounts dry whenever they needed cash to fund their lavish, fake lifestyle. They were going to use my life savings to cover the margins on Big Mama's house. "I am not signing anything," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You are all completely out of your minds if you think I am giving this thief legal access to my life." My mother stood up from the velvet love seat. Denise did not walk toward me with the warmth of a mother trying to comfort a distressed child. She marched toward me like a general preparing to execute a traitor. Her eyes were cold, stripped of any maternal affection. "You are going to sign that document tonight, Maya," my mother dictated, pointing a sharp manicured fingernail at the coffee table. "You are going to sign over control to Trent, and you are going to apologize to him for your hysterical behavior. If you refuse, you are no longer a part of this family." I stared at her, the woman who had carried me for 9 months. "You are choosing him over me. You are choosing a man who insulted our ancestors over your own daughter. I am choosing the survival and the reputation of this family." Denise shot back, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "If you walk out that door without signing that paper, I will erase you. I will stand before the congregation at church on Sunday morning. I will walk right up to Pastor Williams and tell the entire parish that my youngest daughter has lost her mind. I will tell all our friends, all our relatives, and everyone in our social circle that you have become volatile, greedy, and dangerously ungrateful." My father nodded in agreement, his face set in stone. "You will be entirely cut off, Maya. You will be struck from the family tree. You will not be welcome at Thanksgiving. You will not be invited to Christmas. You will not even be notified when your mother and I pass away. You will be dead to us, and everyone in Atlanta who respects our name will know exactly why. We will make sure you have no one." The room fell dead silent. The threat hung in the air, toxic and absolute. For 32 years I had bent over backward to please them. I had swallowed their insults. I had endured the constant comparisons to Chloe. I had quietly cleaned up their messes, hoping that one day they would look at me with the same pride and adoration they freely gave to my sister. I had accepted my role as the scapegoat because I foolishly believed that a flawed family was better than no family at all. Chloe leaned forward, resting her hands on the glass table, bringing her face closer to mine. "Think about it, Maya," she whispered, her voice dripping with toxic sweetness. "You already have no husband. You have a dead-end job. You live alone in a tiny apartment. Do you really want to lose your family too? Just sign the paper. Let Trent make us all wealthy. It is the only way you will ever be useful to this family." I looked down at the white envelope on the table. It represented my complete surrender. It was the contract that would officially reduce my existence to a funding source for their vanity. They expected me to cry. They expected me to beg for their love, to pick up the pen and sign away my freedom just to keep my seat at their dysfunctional table. I could see the anticipation in Trent's eyes. He was already calculating how quickly he could liquidate my retirement accounts to buy his Hamptons mansion. But as I stood there looking at the people who shared my blood, the last lingering thread of my childhood desperation finally snapped. The little girl who wanted her parents' approval vanished. The sister who wanted to be loved dissolved. All that remained was the professional. The woman who had spent years tracking down white-collar criminals, dismantling financial fraud, and putting arrogant predators exactly where they belonged. I reached into my pocket and slowly pulled out my smartphone. I did not reach for the pen. I did not reach for the power of attorney. I looked at my mother perfectly poised in her designer gown. I looked at my father clinging to his empty pride. I looked at my sister smug and secure in her golden child status. And finally, I looked at Trent, the architect of their ultimate destruction. I slowly lowered my phone, holding it at my side. A genuine radiant smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of defeat. It was the smile of a hunter who had just watched the trap spring shut. "You think I lost $350,000? I asked, my voice calm, clear, and ringing with absolute authority. Trent frowned, his confident posture faltering just a fraction. "What are you talking about?" I raised my phone and pressed a single glowing red button on the center of the screen. "No," I said softly, locking eyes with my brother-in-law. "You just swallowed the bait." The massive television screen behind me shifted abruptly from the glowing red warning banners to a stark terminal window scrolling with lines of rapid command code. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and began to move. I stepped away from the coffee table, breaking the static, defensive posture I had held all evening. I slowly paced across the center of the room, my heels sinking into the plush Persian rug. For the first time in my life, I owned this space. I was no longer the shrinking wallflower waiting for my family's approval. I was the apex predator in a room full of arrogant prey. "You have spent the last 5 years mocking my career, Trent," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the soft hum of the television screen. "You called me a glorified calculator, a bookkeeper for small local businesses. My mother told all her country club friends that I balanced checkbooks for a living. Not a single one of you ever bothered to ask what I actually did with those spreadsheets. You were all too busy suffocating on your own superiority to look past the surface." I paused at the edge of the seating area, turning to face the three people who had spent my entire adulthood tearing me down. "I am a senior forensic auditor." I stated the words, slicing through the heavy silence of the living room. "I operate as an independent contractor primarily utilized by the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I track dirty money for a living. I dismantle corporate embezzlement rings. I hunt down offshore tax evaders. And for the last 8 months, my division has been meticulously building a federal case against a massive money laundering syndicate operating out of the Cayman Islands." Chloe let out a shaky breath, her hand flying to her throat. She looked at the television screen and then back to me, her perfectly contoured face twisting in confusion. "What are you talking about, Maya? You drop out of college. You do not have a degree." I smiled at my sister, feeling a profound sense of liberation wash over me. "I dropped out of a standard university program because I was recruited into a specialized federal fast track for cyber forensics and financial auditing. I have more advanced certifications in fraud examination than Trent has custom suits. But you never knew that because none of you ever cared enough to ask. You just assumed I was a failure because my path did not match your pretentious country club expectations." I turned my focus back to Trent. He was staring at the scrolling code on the screen, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles fluttered beneath his skin. The color was rapidly draining from his face. "The syndicate we have been tracking is the exact same fiduciary firm managing your highly aggressive offshore portfolio, Trent," I explained, pacing slowly back toward the center of the room. "We knew the money was moving through those accounts, but we needed a clean, undeniable digital link. We needed someone on the inside. Someone greedy enough, arrogant enough, and stupid enough to execute an unauthorized wire transfer from a flagged domestic IP address directly into their primary receiving server." My father staggered backward, bumping into the edge of the fireplace mantel. He gripped the stone ledge to keep himself upright. "Maya," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "What did you do?" "I did exactly what I was trained to do, Dad. I played my role," I answered, keeping my eyes locked on Trent. I knew Trent was over-leveraged. I saw the signs months ago. The new cars, the expensive watches, the desperate push to buy a Hamptons estate he could not actually afford. I knew he would be looking for liquid cash to cover his margins. So I set a trap in my own home. I left my encrypted laptop sitting wide open on the coffee table. I left a decoy banking tab visible on the screen. And I waited for the so-called financial genius of the family to take the bait. Trent swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked down at his hands as if he could not quite believe what they had just done. That checking account was never mine. I continued, my tone completely devoid of sympathy. It was a digital honeypot, a highly monitored trap funded directly by the United States Treasury. It was loaded with $350,000 of federal money laced with specialized tracking algorithms. You thought you were hacking a local banking portal. You actually walked straight through an open door into a federal surveillance grid. Denise let out a sharp, terrified gasp. She grabbed Chloe's arm, her manicured nails digging into her favorite daughter's skin. "Marcus, do something," Denise pleaded, her voice shrill and panicked. "Tell her to stop this. Tell her to erase the screen." "There is no erasing it, Mom," I said, shaking my head. The moment Trent hit send, he committed international wire fraud. He bypassed digital security protocols, he stole federal funds, and he routed them directly into a black market server. He just handed the IRS the exact digital roadmap they need to dismantle his entire offshore portfolio and freeze every single asset connected to it. I stopped pacing and stood directly in front of Trent. He was looking at the television screen, watching the terminal window display a final confirmation code. The trace was complete. The money had landed. The trap was locked. "You did not just ruin your own career, Trent," I told him, my voice dropping to a deadly serious pitch. "You just initiated a mandatory federal investigation into every single margin loan, every mortgage, and every asset you touch. That includes Big Mama's brownstone. The government is going to tear your financial life apart piece by piece, and there is absolutely nothing your high-priced Wall Street lawyers can do to stop it." For a long, suffocating moment, nobody moved. The reality of the situation crashed down upon them, bearing their arrogance under a mountain of federal consequences. My father looked like he might pass out. My mother was trembling visibly. Chloe was staring at her husband, waiting for him to fix it, waiting for him to assert his usual dominance and make the scary problem go away. Trent stared at the floor. The silence stretched, dragging out the tension until it felt almost unbearable. And then slowly a sound began to build in his chest. It started as a low rumble and quickly escalated into a harsh, grating laugh. He threw his head back and laughed loudly, the sound completely devoid of actual humor. He reached down, picked up his extinguished cigar from the sofa, and casually tossed it onto the glass coffee table. He stood up, brushing the wrinkles from his expensive jacket. He rolled his shoulders and looked down at me. The initial panic in his eyes entirely replaced by a familiar burning arrogance. He took a step toward me, closing the distance until he was towering over me, attempting to use his physical size to regain control of the room. He pointed a finger directly at my face, his lips curling into a cruel, mocking sneer. "You are bluffing!" He spat, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. "You are standing here spinning a ridiculous Hollywood spy story because you are desperate for attention. Federal tracking funds. IRS honeypots. Give me a break, Maya." He turned to my parents, spreading his arms wide in a gesture of supreme confidence. "Look at her. She is losing her mind. She mocked up a fake computer screen to try and scare us because she knows she is entirely powerless." Trent turned back to me, leaning in so close I could smell the stale bourbon on his breath. "You are a nobody, Maya. You are a bitter, jealous little girl who could not even finish a basic degree. The federal government does not hand out $350,000 in bait money to a community college dropout." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I held my ground, looking up into his flushed, sweating face. His breath hitched as he stared into my eyes, searching for any sign of hesitation or deceit. He found none. All he found was the cold, unyielding certainty of a woman who had spent years hunting men exactly like him. "Why do you not check your own accounts, Trent?" I suggested, my voice slicing through his manufactured bravado like a scalpel. "If I am just a bitter little girl playing a prank, then your offshore portfolio should be perfectly fine. Go ahead. Look." Trent swallowed hard. His eyes darted nervously toward my father and then back to me. With a hand that was now noticeably trembling, he reached into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his phone. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint friction of his thumb swiping across the glass screen. He opened his secure banking application, the one he used to monitor his illicit offshore havens. I watched the exact second his reality shattered. The color drained from his face with such violent speed that his skin took on a sickly grayish hue. His mouth opened but no sound came out. His eyes widened in absolute terror as he stared at his screen. The account was not just frozen, it was zeroed out. The federal government had already seized the assets. "What is it, Trent?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling with sudden uncertainty. Her hand fluttered nervously to the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, a nervous tic she had possessed since childhood. "Trent, tell me what she is talking about." He could not answer her. He was paralyzed, staring at the digital confirmation of his own destruction. "Since you seem to have lost your voice, I will gladly explain it to my sister," I said, turning my attention back to the massive smart television mounted above the fireplace. I tapped a new command into my phone. The stark gray interface of the Treasury Department vanished, replaced by a series of highly detailed financial dossiers, bank statements, court filings, and corporate registries. The documents were magnified on the 85-inch screen, impossible for anyone in the room to ignore. "Let us start with the biggest lie of all," I announced, gesturing toward the screen. "The Wall Street executive. The financial visionary who is going to build generational wealth for this family." I zoomed in on a corporate filing from the state of New York. "Trent does not work on Wall Street." "Chloe," I said, keeping my tone completely devoid of sympathy. "He has not worked on Wall Street in nearly 2 years. His boutique investment firm, Vanguard Horizon Securities, did not downsize. They filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy 18 months ago. Trent was unceremoniously fired for gross negligence and suspected embezzlement before the doors even closed. He was stripped of his broker licenses. He is not legally allowed to trade a single penny on behalf of any client anywhere in the United States." "That is a lie," Chloe gasped, taking a step back, as if the television screen itself had physically struck her. She looked at her husband, her eyes pleading for him to deny it. "Trent, tell her she is lying. Tell her you are a senior partner. You go to the office every single day. Where exactly do you go every day?" Trent, I asked, tilting my head. "A rented co-working space. A coffee shop. Because you certainly do not have an office on Wall Street." Trent remained silent, his eyes glued to the floor, his hands shaking so violently he had to stuff his phone back into his pocket to hide the tremor. The arrogant titan of finance had been reduced to a pathetic, cowering fraud in a matter of seconds. My father marched toward the television, his face contorted in a mask of absolute horror as he read the highlighted sections of the bankruptcy filings. The legal jargon was undeniable. "If he is broke," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking with panic. "If he has not worked in 2 years, where is the money coming from? The cars, the designer clothes, the Hamptons estate." "There is no Hamptons estate, Dad," I replied, swiping to the next set of documents on my phone. "There is only a mountain of toxic debt and a desperate Ponzi scheme built entirely on your blind faith in him." I brought up 2 familiar bank logos on the screen side by side. "You wanted to know where the money was coming from. It came from you." Marcus and Denise both gasped in unison. Projected on the screen were the complete transaction histories of their joint retirement accounts and their primary investment portfolios. "You gave him full power of attorney over your retirement funds because you believed he was rolling them into a high-yield mutual fund," I explained, highlighting a series of massive withdrawals. "But there was no mutual fund. Over the last 18 months, Trent has been systematically draining your life savings. He funneled your 401k into shell companies based in the Seychelles. He used your hard-earned money to pay off his own massive personal debts, to lease those luxury cars, and to buy Chloe the diamonds she is currently wearing. Your retirement balance is effectively zero." My mother let out a strangled wailing sound, her hands flying to her face. She swayed on her feet, looking as though she might collapse. Marcus caught her by the arm, but his own legs looked unsteady. He stared at the screen, his eyes tracing the red numbers that detailed his total financial ruin. 30 years of corporate grinding, 30 years of sacrificing his relationship with his children for corporate success, all wiped out by the man he had proudly paraded around the country club as his brilliant son-in-law. But that was not even the worst part, I said, my voice growing colder, harder. You were running out of cash. Trent needed a massive influx of capital to keep the illusion alive, and that is when you... Dad handed him the keys to the only real asset this family had left. I swiped the screen one final time. The image of Big Mama's beautiful historic brick brownstone appeared alongside a complex commercial loan agreement. Trent did not just use the house as collateral, I stated, forcing my father to look at the paperwork. He took out a high-interest predatory commercial mortgage against the property. He extracted every single ounce of equity Big Mama built into that foundation. He took that cash and gambled it on illegal high-risk offshore trades, trying to win back the money he stole from your retirement accounts. And he lost. He lost all of it. That is why he was so desperate tonight. That is why he needed the 350 grand from my account. He was trying to cover a margin call to stop the bank from foreclosing on the brownstone tomorrow morning. Chloe began to sob uncontrollably, sinking down onto the sofa next to the forgotten cigar ash. Her entire identity, her status, her superiority over me had been entirely funded by the destruction of her own parents. You ruined us. Marcus choked out, turning his furious, tear-filled eyes toward Trent. You took everything. We trusted you. I defended you against my own daughter. Trent finally looked up, his face twisted into an ugly, desperate sneer. He backed away toward the hallway, putting distance between himself and my enraged father. You practically begged me to take your money. Trent spat, his voice trembling with cowardly defiance. You were so desperate to impress your rich friends, you did not even read the paperwork. You handed me the house because you are a weak, foolish old man who wanted to pretend he was a Wall Street player. Do not blame me because you were too stupid to protect your own assets. Marcus lunged forward with a furious roar, but before he could reach Trent, my mother stepped directly into his path. Denise was panting heavily, her chest heaving, her eyes wild and unfocused. The cognitive dissonance was simply too much for her to bear. Her perfect reality, her golden child, her wealthy son-in-law, her elite social standing, it had all been incinerated in the span of 5 minutes. Her mind could not accept that she had been completely conned. She needed a scapegoat. She needed the familiar punching bag she had relied on her entire life. She turned away from Trent. She turned away from the television screen projecting her financial ruin. She marched directly toward me. Before I could even register her movement, she raised her hand and struck me across the face. The slap echoed sharply through the living room, stinging my cheek and snapping my head to the side. The physical pain was secondary to the profound, absolute tragedy of her action. Even now, staring at the undeniable proof of her destruction, she chose to attack me. You are lying! My mother screamed, her face contorted with a terrifying, desperate rage. Her hands were balled into fists at her sides, shaking uncontrollably. You hacked into those accounts. You fabricated these documents because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of your sister. You could never stand to see her happy. You are making this up to tear this family apart. My cheek burned where her hand had struck me, a sharp, stinging heat that radiated across my jaw. I did not recoil. I did not reach up to soothe the skin. I simply turned my head back to center and met my mother's wild, panicked eyes with absolute, unyielding calm. I let the silence hang for a fraction of a second, allowing her to absorb the complete futility of her violence. A slap is not going to reverse a federal wire trace, Mom. I said, my voice completely level, and it certainly is not going to put the money back into your drained retirement accounts. Denise shrank back as if she had touched a hot stove. She backed away, her chest heaving, looking frantically between the damning financial documents still projected on the 85-inch screen, and her beloved son-in-law, who was now sweating entirely through his custom silk shirt. Before my mother could form another excuse, Chloe rushed forward. She grabbed Trent's arm, positioning herself as a human shield between him and the ugly truth projected on the wall. Stop it! Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with forced hysteria. Just stop it, Maya. You are insane. You fabricated all of this because you are obsessed with me. You have always been jealous of my life, my marriage, my success. You are trying to ruin us because you have absolutely nothing of your own. I laughed, a short, dry sound that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Jealous of what, Chloe? The fact that your husband is a washed-up fraud facing 20 years in federal prison. Trent is a visionary, Chloe yelled, her manicured fingers digging into Trent's sleeve. He had a temporary liquidity issue. He told me all about it. We needed a short-term bridge loan for a massive corporate merger, and Dad generously offered to back us. It was a family business arrangement. You are twisting a normal financial strategy into some ridiculous crime because you do not understand high-level finance. I looked at my older sister, the flawless golden child who had never been held accountable for a single mistake in her entire 34 years on Earth. She was still trying to play the role of the affluent, supportive wife clinging to a sinking ship. You claim Trent told you about a temporary liquidity issue, I said, stepping closer to her, forcing her to look me in the eye. When exactly did he tell you that, Chloe? She hesitated for a split second. A few weeks ago, she lied smoothly, her chin tilting up in that familiar, condescending way. When the merger got delayed, I raised my phone and tapped the screen. The bank records on the television vanished. In their place appeared a high-resolution screenshot of an email thread. The sender was Trent. The recipient was Chloe. The timestamp was clearly visible in bold black letters. 6 months ago. Let us examine your definition of a temporary liquidity issue, I said, reading the screen aloud for everyone in the room to hear. October 14th. Trent writes, Chloe, the Vanguard accounts are frozen. The bankruptcy trustee is threatening to seize the cars. You have to cancel the St. Bart's trip. I cannot cover the credit card minimums. Chloe gasped, her face draining of all color. She immediately let go of Trent's arm, taking a large step back, as if the television screen itself was radiating heat. I swiped my screen again, pulling up Chloe's direct reply. And here is your response sent 10 minutes later. Trent, you are pathetic. I already promised my sponsors 3 dedicated posts from the luxury villa. If I cancel now, my brand is ruined. Ask my dad for the money. Tell him it is for a real estate flip. Just get the cash. The silence in the room became suffocating. The air felt thick, vibrating with the sheer weight of the betrayal. My mother stared at the screen, her mouth hanging open, her eyes darting between the email and her favorite daughter. You knew, I stated, my voice cold and absolute. You knew he was entirely bankrupt 6 months ago, Chloe. You knew he was a complete fraud before Dad even signed the paperwork to remortgage Big Mama's house. That is out of context, Chloe stammered, her eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for an escape route that did not exist. Her perfect composure was shattering piece by piece. We were under a lot of stress. I was building my influencer brand. I had obligations. Obligations, I asked, swiping the screen one final time. A detailed bank ledger appeared, tracing the exact path of the money my father had handed over. Dad signed the commercial loan against the brownstone on a Thursday morning. $400,000 of family equity handed directly to your husband. On Friday afternoon, Trent wired $40,000 of that exact money directly to your personal publicist. On Monday, he paid the overdue lease on the Bentley you love, flashing on your social media. On Wednesday, you bought a $12,000 designer bag. I stepped right into Chloe's personal space, forcing her to acknowledge her own reflection in the destruction of our family. You did not just stand by while your husband robbed our parents blind. You actively helped him do it. You orchestrated the manipulation. You willingly handed over your own great-grandmother's legacy just so you would not have to admit to your fake internet friends that you were broke. Chloe, my mother whispered, her voice trembling with a horrific realization. She took a shaky step toward her favorite daughter, her hands reaching out as if grasping for an illusion that was rapidly fading. Chloe, tell me this is a mistake. Tell me you did not know he was taking our retirement money to buy purses. Chloe backed away, tears streaming down her face, ruining her flawless makeup. But they were not tears of remorse or guilt. They were the desperate, panicked tears of a cornered animal. "Mom, you do not understand the pressure!" Chloe cried, gesturing wildly, her voice pitching into a defensive shriek. "I had an image to maintain. You raised me to be the best. You told everyone I was marrying a Wall Street titan. What was I supposed to do? Tell the entire country club that my husband was a bankrupt loser? I would have been humiliated. We all would have been humiliated. I had to protect our reputation." A low, agonizing sound broke from the other side of the room. I turned to see my father. Marcus was no longer standing tall. His face had gone a terrifying shade of gray, the color of wet ash. His eyes were wide and unfocused, fixed entirely on Chloe, the daughter he had worshipped, the daughter he had consistently sacrificed my happiness for. He raised a trembling hand to the center of his chest, his fingers gripping the fabric of his shirt, as he visibly struggled to pull air into his lungs. The realization that his golden child had knowingly, willingly sold him out and destroyed his life to maintain her social media vanity was physically destroying him. His breath came in short, ragged gasps, and his knees began to buckle beneath him. The heavy oak door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the vaulted living room. The vibration rattled the expensive artwork on the walls, a physical manifestation of the illusion Trent had just shattered. Inside the room, the devastation was absolute. Marcus was still on his knees, clutching his chest, his breaths coming in ragged, shallow wheezes as he stared at the empty space where his golden son-in-law had just stood. Chloe was crumpled against the sofa, sobbing hysterically into her hands. Her designer dress wrinkled, her flawless facade destroyed. Denise stood frozen in the center of the Persian rug, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror that had finally pierced through her impenetrable denial. They were completely broken. Decades of social climbing, of meticulously curating a fake reality, of stepping on anyone, including their own daughter, to achieve the appearance of elite status, had left them with absolutely nothing. They were bankrupt, publicly humiliated, and facing the loss of the only true asset our ancestors had ever managed to build. I did not feel sorry for them. I felt a cold, clinical detachment. They had made their choices. They had worshipped at the altar of Trent's arrogance, and now they were paying the ultimate price. I ignored their sobbing and gasping. I kept my eyes focused on the front window, listening to the hurried crunch of Trent's expensive Italian leather shoes marching down the paved driveway. He was moving fast, fueled by the adrenaline of his supposed escape. He truly believed he had won. He believed his pedigree, his white-collar arrogance, and his stolen money had made him untouchable. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. With my thumb, I tapped the secure communication icon on my home screen, activating the encrypted line to the earpiece sitting discreetly inside my right ear. "Target is mobile," I said, my voice low, steady, and echoing with absolute professional authority. "He has the decoy funds. He has verbally confessed to the unauthorized offshore wire transfer and the commercial fraud. He intends to flee international via DeKalb Peachtree Airport. You have a green light. Execute the warrant." "Copy that, lead auditor," a deep static-laced voice crackled in my ear. "Moving in." I walked slowly toward the front window, pulling back the heavy silk drape, just enough to have a clear line of sight down the driveway. Behind me, the weeping abruptly stopped. My mother and sister looked up, their tear-streaked faces twisting in confusion at my cold, calculated tone. "Maya," Denise whispered, her voice trembling with residual panic. "Who are you talking to?" I did not answer her. I kept my eyes fixed on the street outside. Trent had just reached the end of the driveway. He was striding toward his leased Bentley, his leather duffel bag slung over his shoulder, pulling his keys from his pocket. He pressed the unlock button, the headlights of the luxury sedan flashing twice in the dark. He reached for the door handle. He never got the chance to open it. Suddenly, the quiet suburban street erupted in a blinding flash of tactical strobe lights. 3 unmarked black SUVs, which had been sitting silently in the shadows at the end of the cul-de-sac, simultaneously threw on their hidden red and blue police flashers. They surged forward with terrifying speed, tires screeching against the asphalt as they converged directly on Trent's position. The vehicles boxed the Bentley in, perfectly blocking any possible avenue of escape. Trent froze, his hand hovering inches from the car door. He stood paralyzed in the harsh glare of the headlights, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming train. The doors of the SUVs flew open simultaneously. A dozen federal agents wearing tactical vests emblazoned with the large bold letters IRS-CID and FBI poured out into the street. They moved with swift, coordinated military precision, their weapons drawn, and leveled directly at the man who thought his lawyers made him invincible. "Trenton Ashford!" A voice boomed over a heavy megaphone, shattering the quiet of the affluent neighborhood. "Federal agents, keep your hands where we can see them. Step away from the vehicle and get on the ground immediately." Inside the living room, Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream. She scrambled to the window, pressing her face against the glass, her hands slapping against the pane. "Trent. Trent. What is happening? What are they doing to him?" Denise rushed to the window beside her, her jaw dropping in sheer disbelief as she watched the flashing police lights illuminate her manicured front lawn. Marcus managed to drag himself up from the floor, leaning heavily against the window frame, his breathing labored as he stared at the scene unfolding outside. Trent did not immediately comply. His arrogance was still fighting his reality. He took a step back, raising a hand to shield his eyes from the blinding strobes, his mouth moving, as he tried to shout something at the agents, undoubtedly demanding to call his high-priced attorneys, insisting they were making a massive mistake. "I said, get on the ground," the lead agent roared, stepping forward and closing the distance. Realizing that his Ivy League degree and his tailored suit offered absolutely zero protection against a dozen federal weapons, Trent's knees finally buckled. He dropped his leather duffel bag to the pavement and slowly sank to his knees, raising his hands in the air in an ultimate posture of surrender. Two agents moved in instantly. They grabbed his arms, forcing him flat onto his stomach against the cold, hard asphalt. They pinned his hands behind his back, the sharp metallic click of heavy handcuffs locking around his wrists, echoing loudly enough to be heard even through the thick glass of the living room window. "Trenton Ashford, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and grand larceny." The lead agent's voice carried clearly through the night air as he hauled Trent roughly to his feet. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "This is not happening," Chloe sobbed, pressing her forehead against the glass. "This cannot be happening. It is a mistake. It has to be a mistake." "It is not a mistake, Chloe," I said, stepping up right behind her, my reflection superimposing over the flashing police lights in the window pane. "It is the consequence of stealing from the federal government." They watched in stunned, horrified silence as the agents patted Trent down, pulling his phone and his passport from his pockets and slipping them into clear plastic evidence bags. The arrogant titan of Wall Street, the man who had just stood in our living room calling us pathetic, foolish wannabes, was now being shoved unceremoniously into the back of an unmarked federal SUV like a common street thug. The lead agent picked up Trent's leather duffel bag and walked toward the front porch. I turned away from the window and opened the heavy oak door, stepping out onto the threshold as the agent approached. "Lead auditor," the agent said, nodding respectfully as he handed me a specialized digital tracking device. "The decoy funds have been successfully locked in the offshore server. The trace confirms the destination IP matches the syndicate's primary hub. We have enough digital evidence to seize the entire network." "Excellent work, Agent Miller," I replied, taking the device. "Ensure the Financial Crimes Unit immediately initiates the asset freeze protocols on all of Ashford's domestic accounts. I want every margin loan, every credit line, and every real estate deed locked down before sunrise. He does not move a single dime." "Already in motion, ma'am," Miller replied. He gestured toward the SUV where Trent was currently secured. He was screaming about calling his lawyers. I allowed a thin, cold smile to cross my face. "Let him call them. They are going to need a hefty retainer up front, and he currently has negative $3 million to his name." Agent Miller chuckled, tipped his head, and turned back toward his vehicle. I watched as the federal convoy pulled away from the curb, their lights flashing silently as they drove out of the affluent neighborhood, taking Trent's fake empire with them. I turned back around and stepped into the living room, closing the door softly behind me. The silence inside the house was absolute. The three of them, my father, my mother, and my sister, were staring at me. They were not looking at me with the familiar disdain or the patronizing pity they had directed at me for my entire adult life. They were looking at me with awe, with terror, with the profound, crushing realization that the daughter they had relentlessly mocked and discarded was the only person in the room who actually held any real power. My father was trembling, his hand still resting against his chest. "Maya," he croaked, his voice cracking with a desperate, pathetic hope. You work for the government. You set the trap. You can fix this. You can tell them to unfreeze the accounts. You can save Big Mama's house." I looked at Marcus, then at Denise, and finally at Chloe. I looked at the people who had gladly traded my happiness for the illusion of wealth. "I hunt criminals, Dad," I said, my voice echoing with icy finality. "I do not bail out fools. You handed him the deed. You owe the bank. And tomorrow morning when the commercial lenders call in the debt, you are going to lose everything." I walked over to the armchair, picked up my coat, and slung it over my arm. I did not look back as I walked out the front door, leaving them to suffocate in the ruins of their own making. My cheek burned where her hand had struck me, a sharp, stinging heat that radiated across my jaw. I did not recoil. I did not raise my hand to soothe the skin. I simply turned my head back to center and met my mother's wild, panicked eyes with absolute, unyielding calm. I let the silence hang for a fraction of a second, allowing her to absorb the complete futility of her violence. "A slap is not going to reverse a federal wire trace, Mom," I said, my voice completely level. "And it certainly is not going to put the money back into your drained retirement accounts. Look at your husband." Denise shrank back as if she had touched a hot stove. She finally tore her eyes away from me and looked down. Marcus was on his knees, clutching his chest, his breaths coming in ragged, shallow wheezes. His face had gone a terrifying shade of gray. The realization that his golden child and his prized son-in-law had knowingly sold him out was physically destroying him. Yet Denise and Chloe were too consumed by their own shattered egos to even kneel beside him. Trent watched the pathetic scene unfold from the edge of the room. The polished, charming Wall Street executive facade he had worn for years suddenly melted away, revealing the rotten, decaying core beneath. He let out a harsh, grating laugh, shaking his head as he looked at my parents with unmasked disgust. "She is right, Denise." Trent spat, his voice dripping with pure venom. "Stop crying like a victim. You practically begged me to take your money." Chloe gasped, staring at her husband as if he had grown a second head. "Trent, what are you saying?" "I am saying I am done playing family with you gullible idiots." Trent snapped, his upper lip curling into a vicious sneer. He paced toward the armchair and snatched his leather duffel bag. "You people are pathetic. You really thought you were part of the elite. You are just a bunch of pretentious fake rich fools playing dress-up in designer clothes you can barely afford. You were so desperate for validation, so incredibly eager to parade a white Ivy League son-in-law around your country club, to prove your status, that you handed me the keys to your entire financial existence without even reading the paperwork." Marcus let out a low, agonizing groan from the floor, his fingers digging into the Persian rug. "You wanted the pedigree," Trent mocked, looking down at my father with cold, dead eyes. "Well, you paid for it. I used your money to keep my lifestyle afloat, and I would do it again. I am not going down for your stupidity. I have the 350,000. I have the remaining liquidity from the brownstone. I am flying to the Caymans tonight, and you people can stay here and drown in the debt." Trent swung his duffel bag over his shoulder and turned his wrath toward me. He pointed a finger at my face, his inherent bigotry finally surfacing. "And you?" He sneered, his voice laced with toxic superiority. "You think you have won because you put some spreadsheets on a television. My lawyers are absolute sharks. They will tie this up in international courts for decades. They will bury you and your little federal task force. My legal team is better than anything a black girl like you could ever afford." Camera action. Dynamic tracking. Following Trent closely from behind as he marches toward the grand double doors of the foyer, his hand reaching for the heavy brass handle. Suddenly, a rapid rack focus shifts the depth of field backwards, landing sharply on Maya. She has not moved. She stands in the center of the room, her arms casually crossed over her chest, a serene, chilling smile playing on her lips. "Have a safe flight, Trent," I called out, my voice slicing through the tense air of the foyer. "But you might want to check your Cayman balances one more time before you call your private pilot." Trent froze. His hand hovered an inch away from the brass doorknob. The absolute certainty in my voice pierced through his arrogant armor. Slowly, he dropped his hand. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, his fingers moving frantically as he opened his encrypted offshore banking application. I watched the exact second his reality was entirely obliterated. The glowing blue interface of his application shifted, flashing a massive, glaring red error screen. The numbers vanished. His account balances were gone, replaced by a single terrifying block of text: account frozen, federal compliance hold. "What did you do?" Trent breathed, his voice barely a whisper. He tapped the screen repeatedly, violently, trying to refresh the page, but the red warning banner remained locked in place. "What did you do to my accounts?" "I did not do anything, Trent," I explained, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. "The IRS did. I told you that checking account was a honeypot. But what I did not tell you is that the $350,000 you stole was embedded with digital watermarks. It was laced with highly classified algorithmic tracking code." Trent stared at his phone, his breathing turning rapid and shallow. "The absolute second those federal funds touched your Cayman server, they triggered an automated, irreversible freeze protocol across the entire syndicate." I continued, my voice ringing with professional authority. "The digital watermarks act like a virus. Any account that touched that money, any shell company linked to your IP address, any hidden asset you thought was safe, it is all gone. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network just locked every single penny to your name." Trent staggered backward, his shoulders hitting the heavy wooden door. "You do not have the money for a flight to the Caymans," I told him, watching the sheer terror consume his features. "You do not have the money for your shark lawyers. You do not even have the money to buy an Uber ride to the airport. You are completely, undeniably broke." For a moment, the room was dead silent. The magnitude of his absolute destruction finally crashed down upon him. He was trapped. He was bankrupt. He was going to federal prison. The polished, arrogant gentleman vanished, completely replaced by a cornered feral animal. He dropped his phone to the marble floor, the glass screen shattering upon impact. He let out a guttural, terrifying roar of pure, unadulterated rage. "Give me the password," Trent screamed, his face turning an explosive shade of crimson. He lunged away from the door, his hands outstretched like claws, charging directly at me, to wrap his fingers around my throat and force the code out of me. "Undo it right now, you bitch, or I will kill you." My cheek burned where her hand had struck me, a sharp, stinging heat that radiated across my jaw. I did not recoil. I did not raise my hand to soothe the skin. I simply turned my head back to center and met my mother's wild, panicked eyes with absolute, unyielding calm. I let the silence hang for a fraction of a second, allowing her to absorb the complete futility of her violence. "A slap is not going to reverse a federal wire trace, Mom," I said, my voice completely level. "And it certainly is not going to put the money back into your drained retirement accounts. Look at your husband." Denise shrank back as if she had touched a hot stove. She finally tore her eyes away from me and looked down. Marcus was on his knees, clutching his chest, his breaths coming in ragged, shallow wheezes. His face had gone a terrifying shade of gray. The realization that his golden child and his prized son-in-law had knowingly sold him out was physically destroying him. Yet Denise and Chloe were too consumed by their own shattered egos to even kneel beside him. Trent watched the pathetic scene unfold from the edge of the room. The polished, charming Wall Street executive facade he had worn for years suddenly melted away, revealing the rotten, decaying core beneath. He let out a harsh, grating laugh, shaking his head as he looked at my parents with unmasked disgust. "She is right, Denise." Trent spat, his voice dripping with pure venom. "Stop crying like a victim. You practically begged me to take your money." Chloe gasped, staring at her husband as if he had grown a second head. "Trent, What are you saying? I am saying I am done playing family with you gullible idiots. Trent snapped his upper lip, curling into a vicious sneer. He paced toward the armchair and snatched his leather duffel bag. You people are pathetic. You really thought you were part of the elite. You are just a bunch of pretentious fake rich fools playing dress-up in designer clothes you can barely afford. You were so desperate for validation, so incredibly eager to parade a white Ivy League son-in-law around your country club, to prove your status, that you handed me the keys to your entire financial existence without even reading the paperwork. Marcus let out a low, agonizing groan from the floor, his fingers digging into the Persian rug. You wanted the pedigree, Trent mocked, looking down at my father with cold, dead eyes. Well, you paid for it. I used your money to keep my lifestyle afloat, and I would do it again. I am not going down for your stupidity. I have the 350,000. I have the remaining liquidity from the brownstone. I am flying to the Caymans tonight, and you people can stay here and drown in the debt. Trent swung his duffel bag over his shoulder and turned his wrath toward me. He pointed a finger at my face, his inherent bigotry finally surfacing. And you? He sneered, his voice laced with toxic superiority. You think you have won because you put some spreadsheets on a television. My lawyers are absolute sharks. They will tie this up in international courts for decades. They will bury you in your little federal task force. My legal team is better than anything a black girl like you could ever afford. Camera action. Dynamic tracking. Following Trent closely from behind as he marches toward the grand double doors of the foyer, his hand reaching for the heavy brass handle. Suddenly, a rapid rack focus shifts the depth of field backwards, landing sharply on Maya. She has not moved. She stands in the center of the room, her arms casually crossed over her chest, a serene, chilling smile playing on her lips. Have a safe flight, Trent, I called out, my voice slicing through the tense air of the foyer. But you might want to check your Cayman balances one more time before you call your private pilot. Trent froze. His hand hovered an inch away from the brass doorknob. The absolute certainty in my voice pierced through his arrogant armor. Slowly, he dropped his hand. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, his fingers moving frantically as he opened his encrypted offshore banking application. I watched the exact second his reality was entirely obliterated. The glowing blue interface of his application shifted, flashing a massive glaring red error screen. The numbers vanished. His account balances were gone, replaced by a single terrifying block of text: account frozen, federal compliance hold. What did you do? Trent breathed, his voice barely a whisper. He tapped the screen repeatedly, violently, trying to refresh the page, but the red warning banner remained locked in place. What did you do to my accounts? I did not do anything, Trent, I explained, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. The IRS did. I told you that checking account was a honeypot. But what I did not tell you is that the $350,000 you stole was embedded with digital watermarks. It was laced with highly classified algorithmic tracking code. Trent stared at his phone, his breathing turning rapid and shallow. The absolute second those federal funds touched your Cayman server, they triggered an automated, irreversible freeze protocol across the entire syndicate. I continued, my voice ringing with professional authority. The digital watermarks act like a virus. Any account that touched that money, any shell company linked to your IP address, any hidden asset you thought was safe, it is all gone. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network just locked every single penny to your name. Trent staggered backward, his shoulders hitting the heavy wooden door. You do not have the money for a flight to the Caymans, I told him, watching the sheer terror consume his features. You do not have the money for your shark lawyers. You do not even have the money to buy an Uber ride to the airport. You are completely, undeniably broke. For a moment, the room was dead silent. The magnitude of his absolute destruction finally crashed down upon him. He was trapped. He was bankrupt. He was going to federal prison. The polished, arrogant gentleman vanished, completely replaced by a cornered, feral animal. He dropped his phone to the marble floor, the glass screen shattering upon impact. He let out a guttural, terrifying roar of pure, unadulterated rage. "Give me the password!" Trent screamed, his face turning an explosive shade of crimson. He lunged away from the door, his hands outstretched like claws charging directly at me to wrap his fingers around my throat and force the code out of me. "Undo it right now, you bitch, or I will kill you." Before his fingers could even graze my skin, a blur of designer silk and manicured fury slammed into him from the right. It was Chloe. The sheer force of her impact knocked Trent off balance, sending him stumbling backward into the heavy mahogany console table. A priceless Ming vase wobbled precariously before crashing to the marble floor, exploding into 1,000 jagged pieces. But the sound of shattering porcelain was entirely drowned out by the feral, blood-curdling shriek tearing from my sister's throat. "You were going to leave me!" Chloe screamed, launching herself at him again. Her hands, usually so perfectly poised for photographs, curled into fists as she hammered them against his chest. "You were going to take the money and leave me here to face the bank. You were going to let me take the fall for everything." "Get off me, you absolute psycho!" Trent roared, throwing his arms up to deflect her blows. He grabbed her wrists, his grip vicious and unforgiving, twisting her arms until she cried out in pain. I stood perfectly still in the center of the foyer, watching the scene unfold like a masterfully orchestrated stage play reaching its violent climax. If a camera were capturing this moment, it would be slowly circling the room, panning across the absolute catastrophic implosion of the perfect family. The lens would catch the manic desperation in Trent's sweat-drenched face, the ruined mascara streaming down Chloe's bruised cheeks, the terrifying ash-gray pallor of my father's skin, and the paralyzed horror radiating from my mother. It was a masterpiece of mutual destruction. "I lied for you," Chloe sobbed, struggling wildly against his grip. Her flawless blowout was a tangled mess, her expensive dress slipping off one shoulder. "I convinced Dad to sign the mortgage paperwork. I told Mom those transfer documents were just standard corporate restructuring. I protected your reputation while you were bankrupting us and you were going to sneak onto a plane and abandon me. You are a liability?" Trent spat, his voice laced with absolute disgust. He shoved her backward hard. "You are a vapid, shallow, money-leeching liability. Do you really think I would drag you to the Caymans? You spend cash faster than I can steal it. You do not care about me. You never cared about me. You only cared about the black card and the zip code I provided. The second the credit lines dried up, you were ready to run to your daddy for a bailout." Chloe stumbled her heel, catching on the edge of the Persian rug. She lost her balance and crashed hard to the floor, her knee striking the sharp wooden edge of the coffee table. A sharp cry of pain escaped her lips, but Trent did not even flinch. He stood over her, breathing heavily, adjusting the lapels of his ruined silk suit with trembling hands. "You disgust me," Trent sneered, looking down at the woman he had sworn to love and protect. "You are exactly like your parents, desperate, pathetic social climbers who would swallow any lie as long as it was wrapped in a designer label. You deserve to be left behind holding the bag. Do not speak to my daughter that way." The voice was weak, raspy, and barely recognizable, but it carried a desperate, dying echo of paternal authority. Marcus had managed to drag himself up from the floor. He was leaning heavily against the back of the sofa, his left hand still clutching the center of his chest. His face was slick with a cold sweat, his lips tinged with a frightening shade of blue. But the sight of his golden child being struck down had overridden his failing physical body. He took a shaky, unsteady step toward Trent, his right hand trembling as he raised it in a feeble attempt to defend his favorite daughter. "Trenton, you will stop this madness right now," Marcus wheezed, struggling to pull air into his lungs. "You will not lay another hand on Chloe. You are going to fix this. You are going to call your bankers and fix this mess, or I swear I will destroy you." Trent turned to look at my father, and the expression on his face was one of pure, unadulterated contempt. The final shred of the respectful, deferential son-in-law vanished, leaving behind only the arrogant, ruthless predator who had systematically drained our family dry. "You are going to destroy me." Trent laughed, a harsh, grating sound that bounced off the vaulted ceilings. "Look at yourself, Marcus. You are a broken, bankrupt old man, having a heart attack in a house you no longer own. You gave me everything because you were too arrogant and too stupid to read a basic financial ledger. You wanted to play in the big leagues and you got played. Marcus let out a roar of absolute outrage, lunging forward with a burst of adrenaline. He grabbed the collar of Trent's suit jacket, his knuckles turning white, as he tried to physically shake the younger, much stronger man. But Trent did not hesitate. He did not show an ounce of respect or restraint. With a swift, violent motion, Trent raised his arm and forcefully shoved Marcus backward. The impact was brutal. My father's feet tangled together, his precarious balance shattering instantly. He flew backward, his arms flailing wildly in the air as he crashed directly into the heavy glass coffee table. The thick, tempered glass shattered upon impact with a deafening crash, sending thousands of sharp, crystalline shards exploding across the expensive rug. Marcus groaned a terrible wet sound as he collapsed into the ruin of broken glass and splintered wood, his body going dangerously still. Marcus, Denise shrieked, the sound tearing through the room like a siren. The spell of her paralysis finally broke. My mother threw herself onto the floor, ignoring the shards of glass cutting into her knees as she scrambled toward my father. She grabbed his shoulders, shaking him frantically, her perfectly manicured hands smearing with dust and debris. Marcus, Marcus, please look at me. Look at me. She looked up, her wild, tear-filled eyes locking onto Trent. You monster, she sobbed, her voice cracking with absolute despair. You took everything. You took our money, you took our home, and now you are trying to kill my husband. Trent backed away from the carnage, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically around the room. He was trapped. The digital watermarks had locked his funds. His physical escape route was blocked by the family he had just destroyed. He looked like a rat backed into a corner, completely stripped of his charm, his wealth, and his power. I have to go, Trent muttered, his voice pitching into a manic, desperate frequency. I have to get out of here. I have to find a secondary terminal. I can bypass the federal hold if I can just find an unsecured network. He lunged for his duffel bag, dragging it up from the floor, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip the leather straps. He turned toward the heavy front doors, ready to bolt into the night, ready to run on foot if he had to. But as his hand reached for the brass handle, a new sound pierced through the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of the ruined living room. It started as a faint, distant hum drifting through the quiet suburban night air. But within seconds it grew louder, sharper, multiplying in intensity until it became an undeniable, piercing wail. Sirens. Multiple sirens screaming down the affluent, tree-lined streets of the neighborhood, growing deafeningly loud and converging directly on our exact location. The deafening wail of the sirens tore through the neighborhood, the sound bouncing off the manicured lawns and echoing through the shattered remnants of my parents' living room. Trent's eyes darted toward the front window, which was suddenly bathed in the frantic strobing flashes of red and blue light. Panic, raw and unfiltered, finally consumed him. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. He turned back to me, his features twisting into a mask of pure, desperate hatred. You set me up, he hissed, his voice trembling with a volatile mixture of terror and homicidal rage. I will kill you before they even reach the porch. He took a massive, aggressive stride toward me, his hands raising to strike, intending to silence the only person who had ever held him accountable. He never made it. The explosion was deafening. The massive, custom-built solid oak front door did not just open, it was utterly obliterated. The reinforced brass hinges shrieked and gave way as a heavy steel battering ram smashed through the center of the wood, sending thick splinters and clouds of pulverized plaster rocketing into the grand foyer. The sheer concussive force of the breach rattled the crystal chandelier above us. The world seemed to tilt violently on its axis, shifting the entire room into a chaotic, disorienting blur of sudden violence and noise. FBI, nobody move, get down on the ground right now. A tide of dark Kevlar tactical helmets and heavy boots flooded into the pristine house. The elite tactical team moved with terrifying synchronized precision, fanning out across the Persian rugs and imported Italian marble. Brilliant beams of ruby-red laser sights sliced through the sudden haze of dust, dancing frantically across the expensive artwork and vaulted ceilings before locking dead center on Trent's chest. He froze, his hands still raised halfway toward me, his arrogant threat dying instantly in his dry throat. "Get on the ground," a heavily armored agent roared. Before Trent's privileged brain could even process the command to surrender, two agents hit him with the force of a freight train. He was swept off his feet and slammed face first into the floor with a brutal, unapologetic thud. He landed squarely in the wreckage of the coffee table Marcus had shattered moments earlier. The sickening metallic crunch of Trent's $50,000 custom Rolex scraping and cracking against the jagged shards of tempered glass cut sharply through the shouting. Trent gasped for air, his pristine silk suit tearing against the debris as an agent planted a heavy tactical boot squarely between his shoulder blades. His arms were wrenched backward with swift, practiced efficiency. The sharp, heavy zip of thick plastic restraints locked his wrists together permanently. The supposed titan of Wall Street was pinned to the floor like a common street thug, his cheek pressed into the dust, whimpering, as the reality of his future finally crushed him. In the corner of the room, the remaining fragments of my family completely disintegrated. Chloe let out a piercing, hysterical scream, scrambling backward until her spine hit the wall. Her hands were clamped tightly over her ears, as if she could physically block out the nightmare unfolding in her perfect, curated home. Denise had thrown her body over Marcus, shielding him from the tactical entry, both of them paralyzed, shaking uncontrollably, as heavily armed agents secured the perimeter. Their affluent, untouchable bubble had been violently popped, invaded by the harsh consequences of the real world they had spent decades looking down upon. "Clear," an agent shouted from the kitchen. "Living room secure," another barked, stepping effortlessly over Trent's immobilized body. Through the settling dust and the strobe of police lights spilling in from the ruined doorway, a figure stepped into the house. He was tall, wearing a dark FBI windbreaker, a coiled radio earpiece tucked neatly behind his ear. His eyes swept over the weeping mother, the hyperventilating sister, and the broken father gasping for air on the floor. He did not offer them a single ounce of sympathy. He barely registered their existence. Instead, the tactical commander walked with deliberate, measured steps straight to the center of the room where I was standing completely unbothered, my arms still casually crossed over my chest. He stopped squarely in front of me. The shouting in the room instantly died down, leaving only the sound of Trent's pathetic, muffled sobbing against the floorboards. The commander straightened his posture, his expression shifting into one of absolute professional deference, and delivered a crisp nod. "Supervisory Special Agent Maya," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the devastated room. "The perimeter is fully secured. We have the arrest warrants." The wail of the sirens did not just approach. They surrounded the property, a deafening mechanical scream that vibrated through the floorboards and rattled the expensive crystal chandeliers hanging above us. Brilliant flashes of red and blue light violently pierced through the sheer curtains of the front windows, casting long, frantic, rotating shadows across the ruined living room. The affluent, untouchable sanctuary my parents had built was suddenly exposed, illuminated like a crime scene. Trent froze, his hand hovering over the handle of his leather duffel bag. The manic energy that had fueled his attempt to flee evaporated, replaced by a cold, suffocating terror. He looked toward the front window where the silhouettes of heavily armored vehicles were now visible, blocking the driveway tearing across my mother's meticulously manicured lawn. Heavy doors slammed shut outside, followed by the muffled, authoritative shouts of tactical commands. He slowly turned his head to look at me. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The frozen Cayman accounts, the digital watermarks, the timing of the sirens. It was not a coincidence. It was a perfectly executed trap, and the jaws had just snapped shut around his neck. "You set me up!" Trent snarled, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with a feral, cornered desperation. His eyes went completely dark, the last remnants of his Wall Street charm replaced by pure, unfiltered violence. "You planned this exactly for tonight." I stood my ground, my hands resting casually in the pockets of my trousers. I did not give him the satisfaction of a verbal response. I simply held his gaze, letting him drown in the absolute certainty of his own destruction. "You are going to fix this," Trent roared. He abandoned the duffel bag and lunged across the distance separating us. He closed the gap in 3 massive strides, his hands coming up to grab me, his face twisting into a mask of homicidal rage. You are going to get on your phone right now. You are going to clear those offshore accounts, and you are going to tell whoever is outside that door that there has been a massive misunderstanding. Undo it right now, you bitch, or I will kill you. He was inches away. I could smell the stale sweat and expensive cologne radiating off his skin. His hands reached for my throat. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I knew exactly what was on the other side of that door. Before his fingers could even graze my collar, the entire house convulsed. A deafening explosive crash obliterated the remaining silence in the room. The massive custom-built oak front doors were violently breached. The heavy wood splintered and tore from its reinforced iron hinges, blasting inward with the force of a localized bomb. Pieces of the doorframe became shrapnel flying across the marble foyer and clattering against the walls. The visual field of the room seemed to violently tilt, throwing everything into a chaotic, disorienting spin. The space was instantly flooded with a dozen heavily armed tactical agents clad in dark Kevlar vests. The letters FBI were emblazoned in stark glowing yellow across their chests. Muzzle flashlights sliced through the dust floating in the air, accompanied by the terrifying rapid sweep of red laser sights, crisscrossing the living room walls, the furniture, and finally settling dead center on Trent's chest. FBI! Nobody move! Get your hands in the air! The tactical commands were deafening, overlapping, and echoing with absolute authority. Trent's homicidal rage vanished in a fraction of a millisecond. The sheer, overwhelming force of the federal raid broke his arrogant spirit instantly. He threw his hands into the air, stumbling backward, his mouth opening in a silent scream as the red laser dots danced across his expensive silk shirt. Get on the ground. Face down. Do it now. Trent did not move fast enough. 2 agents closed the distance with terrifying speed. One grabbed his right shoulder, the other swept his legs out from under him. Trent crashed hard to the floor, a pathetic, undignified heap of ruined entitlement. The impact shook the floorboards. He landed directly in the center of the debris field where my father had fallen earlier. The heavy tactical boot of the lead agent planted itself firmly between Trent's shoulder blades, pinning him flat against the Persian rug. Trent groaned in pain as his arms were wrenched violently behind his back. As he struggled, his left arm was pressed hard into the floor. The heavy, customized gold Rolex on his wrist, the exact watch he had bought using the money stolen from my parents' retirement accounts, scraped violently against a massive, jagged shard of the shattered glass coffee table. The sickening sound of scratching metal and shattering crystal echoed clearly, a perfect poetic destruction of his stolen wealth. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream, a sound of absolute unhinged hysteria. She scrambled backward on her hands and knees, pressing her back against the far wall, her hands clutching her head as she watched her untouchable husband being treated like a violent street criminal. Trent! Trent! What is happening? Someone help him! Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking, her flawless designer dress soaking up the spilled water from a broken vase nearby. She tried to lunge forward, a desperate attempt to reach him. "Ma'am, stay exactly where you are," a female agent ordered, stepping into Chloe's path and pointing a firm, commanding finger at her face. "Do not make a single movement or you will be detained for interfering with a federal raid. Sit down and keep your hands visible." Chloe collapsed against the baseboard, sobbing uncontrollably, her entire reality fracturing into dust. Across the room, my mother Denise was completely paralyzed. She stood frozen near the hallway, her hands trembling violently in the air, her eyes wide with a terror she had never experienced in her sheltered, privileged life. She stared at the federal agents, at the tactical rifles, at her son-in-law bleeding slightly onto her expensive rug. The elite social status she had worshipped for decades offered absolutely zero protection against the brutal reality of a federal tactical breach. Behind the initial wave of armed agents, 2 paramedics rushed through the shattered doorway. They carried a medical bag and a portable defibrillator, moving with urgent precision. They bypassed Trent entirely and rushed straight to the corner of the room where my father Marcus still lay, his skin gray, his breathing dangerously shallow. They immediately began cutting away his shirt to attach monitor pads, taking over the scene with clinical efficiency. The house was a storm of operational chaos, voices overlapping radios crackling with static, the harsh glare of tactical lights illuminating the wreckage of our family home. The fake perfection they had all fought so hard to maintain had been thoroughly violently dismantled. With the perimeter fully secured, the shouting subsided, replaced by the crisp, efficient communication of a successful operation. The lead tactical agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a severe expression, holstered his weapon. He stepped away from Trent, leaving two other agents to haul the handcuffed, defeated man to his feet. Trent looked pathetic, his suit torn, his face pale, his gold watch deeply gouged and ruined. The lead agent ignored the sobbing Chloe. He ignored the terrified Denise. He walked with measured, heavy steps directly to the center of the room. He stopped 2 feet in front of me, his posture shifting instantly from aggression to absolute professional respect. He straightened his shoulders, looking me directly in the eye, and spoke in a clear, carrying voice that silenced the remaining whimpers in the room. "Supervisory Special Agent Maya," he announced, his words landing like heavy stones on the ears of my family. "The perimeter is secure. We have successfully executed the federal arrest warrants for Trent and Ashford. How do you wish to proceed with the remaining suspects?" The room went dead silent. The only sounds were the static of the police radios and the faint, rhythmic beeping of the paramedic's heart monitor attached to my father. Chloe stopped crying. Her mouth hung open, her tear-streaked face twisting into an expression of profound, uncomprehending shock. She stared at the heavily armed FBI agent, treating her outcast sister with the utmost deference. Denise slowly lowered her trembling hands. Her eyes darted from the agent to the tactical team and finally settled on me. The realization hit her with devastating clarity. The daughter they had mocked, the daughter they had called a bitter failure, the daughter they had excluded from their elite circle, was not just a disgruntled family member. She was the federal authority that had just brought their entire world crashing down. Even Trent, standing bruised and handcuffed between two agents, lifted his head. His eyes locked onto mine, and the absolute horror of understanding finally broke whatever remained of his arrogant spirit. He had not been outsmarted by a jealous sister-in-law. He had been hunted, tracked, and trapped by a supervisory special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I stood tall in the center of the wreckage, my posture relaxed but commanding. I looked at the broken pieces of my family, letting the weight of my true identity crush the last of their illusions. "Agent Miller, coordinate the transport protocol for the suspect," I commanded, my voice slicing effortlessly through the heavy, dust-filled air of the ruined foyer. "Ensure the secondary tactical unit secures his personal residence and seizes all electronic devices. We need his laptops, his secure hard drives, and any physical ledgers bagged and tagged before his defense attorneys even wake up to realize what has happened." "Understood. Supervisory," Special Agent Miller replied sharply. He gave a swift hand signal to the tactical team holding Trent down. "Get him up and get him out of here." Two heavily armored agents hauled Trent to his feet. They did not handle him with the gentle deference he was accustomed to. They yanked him upward by his handcuffed arms, forcing him to stand amidst the shattered glass of the coffee table. His custom silk suit was torn at the shoulder, stained with dust, and a few drops of his own blood. The arrogant smirk that had defined his existence was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, vacant stare of absolute defeat. I watched the faces of my family as the reality of my identity finally broke through their impenetrable walls of delusion. It was a slow, agonizing realization. My mother stood completely paralyzed, her manicured hands trembling violently at her sides. For my entire life, Denise had treated me as a failure, a stain on her perfect social resume because I chose public service over corporate greed. Now she was staring at the undeniable proof that her despised daughter held the power to obliterate the very elite world she worshipped. My father was still on the floor, surrounded by the flashing equipment of the paramedics. The emergency medics had ripped open his expensive dress shirt to attach heart monitors, their clinical efficiency contrasting sharply with the chaotic destruction of the room. Marcus turned his head weakly, his gray, sweating face looking up at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a horrific mixture of physical pain and profound psychological devastation. The realization that he had sacrificed his own flesh and blood to elevate a common criminal was a bitter poison he was now forced to swallow. "Move it out!" Agent Miller barked. The tactical agents shoved Trent forward, marching him forcefully toward the splintered remains of the grand oak front doors. I followed them, stepping onto the front porch to oversee the extraction. The cool night air washed over my face, carrying the sharp scent of ozone from the tactical strobe lights. But it was not just the flashing red and blue lights that illuminated the destruction of my family. It was the audience. The sprawling, manicured lawns of the affluent neighborhood were no longer empty. The deafening sirens and the explosive breach of our front door had drawn everyone out of their multi-million-dollar homes. I scanned the perimeter and saw them all. There was Mrs. Harrington, the formidable president of Denise's exclusive country club, standing at the end of her driveway in a silk robe, her hand covering her mouth in shock. There was Mr. Vance, the senior vice president of the local bank, whispering frantically into his phone as he watched the federal vehicles parked on our grass. Every single wealthy, judgmental, status-obsessed neighbor my parents had spent decades trying to impress was standing under the streetlights witnessing their ultimate humiliation. Trent was paraded down the front walkway directly under the harsh glare of the tactical spotlights. He tried to lower his head desperately, trying to shield his face from the prying eyes of the neighborhood elite, but an agent firmly grabbed the back of his neck, keeping his face elevated for everyone to see. He was shoved unceremoniously into the back of a heavily armored federal transport vehicle. The heavy steel doors slammed shut with a definitive ringing thud that echoed across the silent, watching neighborhood. I turned my back on the spectacle and walked back into the living room, stepping over a piece of the shattered doorframe. The moment I crossed the threshold, the paralyzed silence inside the house violently shattered. "You ruined everything." Chloe launched herself across the room, her voice tearing out of her throat in a ragged, hysterical shriek. She scrambled over the ruined Persian rug, her designer dress tearing against a stray piece of glass, completely blind to the danger. She threw herself at me, her hands curled into desperate clawing fists, aiming directly for my face. Before I even had to raise a hand to defend myself, 2 FBI agents intercepted her. They caught her by the arms, halting her momentum instantly and shoving her firmly backward. Chloe stumbled, hitting the wall and sliding down it until she was sitting on the floor weeping with a frantic, unhinged energy. "You planned this!" Chloe screamed, kicking her legs against the floor like a tantrum-throwing toddler. Her flawless blowout was a tangled, sweaty mess. Mascara ran down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks, ruining her perfectly contoured face. "You were jealous of me. You have always been jealous of me. You hated that I was a queen. You hated that I had a rich husband and a perfect life, so you fabricated this entire investigation just to destroy me." I stood looking down at my older sister, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical pity. "You were never a queen, Chloe," I said, my voice echoing with icy precision. "You were a remarkably convenient prop. You were a human shield for a man who used your vanity to steal our parents blind." "I did not know," Chloe wailed, shaking her head frantically, desperately trying to cling to her victimhood. "I did not know he was stealing. He told me he was a visionary. He told me the money was for a bridge loan. I am an influencer. I have brand deals. I have an image to maintain. How am I supposed to explain this to my followers? What am I supposed to tell the country club? You have ruined my entire life." "You ruined your own life the second you decided your social media image was more important than your own family," I countered, taking a slow step toward her. "I showed you the bank ledgers, Chloe. I showed you the exact email where you explicitly instructed Trent to con Dad out of his equity so you could maintain your fake luxury lifestyle. You knew the Vanguard accounts were frozen 6 months ago. You knew he was bankrupt. You are not a victim. You are a co-conspirator." Chloe covered her ears with her hands, sobbing loudly, entirely incapable of handling the weight of her own accountability. She looked frantically toward our mother, searching for the unconditional, blinding validation she had received her entire life. "Mom, tell her to stop!" Chloe begged, her voice pitching into a pathetic whine. "Mom, make her fix this. Tell them Trent made a mistake. Tell them we will pay the money back." But Denise did not answer. She remained frozen against the wall, staring blankly at the shattered coffee table, her mind seemingly broken by the sheer magnitude of the social and financial devastation. She was finally witnessing the true cost of raising a golden child with zero moral compass. Supervisory Special Agent Maya. I turned away from my sister. Agent Miller was walking back into the living room, his heavy tactical boots crunching over the broken glass. He carried a thick manila folder in his gloved hands. His expression was grim and strictly professional as he stopped beside me. "The transport is secure and moving toward the federal holding facility," Agent Miller reported, his voice projecting clearly across the room. "We have successfully frozen 32 domestic accounts and seized all secondary digital hardware from the suspect's vehicle. However, we have a critical update regarding the asset forfeiture protocols." "Proceed, Agent Miller," I said, keeping my posture rigid. Agent Miller opened the folder, pulling out a stack of documents stamped with heavy red federal seals. He turned slightly, directing his attention away from me and focusing directly on Marcus, who was currently receiving oxygen from the paramedics on the floor, and Denise, who was trembling against the wall. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashford," Agent Miller announced, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "Based on the digital forensics recovered during this operation, we have traced the exact routing of the $400,000 you transferred to Trenton Ashford yesterday morning." Marcus let out a weak, desperate wheeze, his eyes locking onto the federal agent. "The funds were pulled directly from the equity of this property." Agent Miller continued reading from the official document. "Because Trenton Ashford immediately routed those specific funds through an illicit offshore laundering syndicate to cover previous fraudulent debts, the money is now officially classified as the proceeds of a federal crime." Denise gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "What does that mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What are you saying?" "It means," Agent Miller stated, coldly closing the folder with a sharp snap, "that this house is no longer a private residence. Under federal asset forfeiture laws, because this property was used as collateral to knowingly fund an international money laundering operation, it is now classified as an active piece of federal evidence." The room grew terrifyingly still. Even Chloe stopped crying, her breath catching in her throat as she stared at the agent. "Effective immediately," Agent Miller declared, delivering the final crushing blow. "The United States government is seizing this property. You have until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning to collect your essential personal belongings and vacate the premises. If you are still inside this house when the bank receivers and federal marshals arrive, you will be arrested for trespassing on federal property." The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. It was the sound of an entire dynasty crumbling into fine dust. For decades, my parents had worshipped at the altar of appearances. They had built their entire identities around their zip code, their country club memberships, and their proximity to imagined power. Now the real power was standing in their living room, wearing a federal badge and systematically dismantling their lives. Marcus clutched his chest, his breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He stared at me, his eyes searching my face for the obedient, desperate-to-please daughter he had marginalized for 35 years. He found nothing but a polished mirror reflecting his own spectacular failure. "Maya, you have to stop this," my father wheezed, attempting to project a fatherly authority he no longer possessed. "You are an agent. You have clearance. Tell these people to stand down. We are your family. You cannot allow them to take our home. We have nowhere else to go." I looked down at the man who had co-signed his own destruction. "I do not make the laws, Marcus," I said, my voice eerily calm, slicing through the tension in the room like a scalpel. "I merely enforce them. You willingly signed the equity transfer. You gave a known fraudster power of attorney. This house is the direct collateral of a federal crime. The bank owns the deed and the bureau owns the crime scene." Denise let out a sharp, guttural sob, finally pushing herself away from the baseboard. She stumbled forward, ignoring the tactical agents who stood like stone statues around the perimeter. She reached out her trembling fingers, grasping at the air inches from my jacket, as if she could somehow reel me back into her web of control. "You cannot do this to us," Denise cried, her voice cracking under the weight of her sheer panic. "We are your parents. We raised you. We gave you everything. If they take the house tomorrow morning, we will be on the street. We will be ruined. Think of the humiliation. Everyone in the neighborhood is outside watching us right now. You should have thought about your neighborhood reputation before you let Trent launder stolen assets through your checking accounts, I replied, stepping back to ensure she could not touch me. Chloe, who had been sitting in the debris of the coffee table, suddenly scrambled to her knees. Her tear-streaked face twisted into a mask of desperate, frantic calculation. She wiped her ruined mascara with the back of her hand, her survival instincts finally kicking in. Mom, do not beg her. Chloe snapped, her voice trembling but laced with her usual toxic entitlement. We do not need her. We do not need this stupid house. Let them have it. Denise whipped her head around to stare at her golden child. What are you saying, Chloe? We have nothing. We have Big Mama's house, Chloe declared, her eyes wide with a frantic, delusional hope. We have the brownstone in Brooklyn. It is fully paid off. It has been in the family for 40 years. We will pack our things tonight, hire a moving truck, and drive to New York tomorrow. It is a historic property. We can renovate the upper floors. I can set up my studio in the master suite. It is going to be fine. We still have the brownstone. Denise let out a massive exhale, her shoulders dropping as relief flooded her features. She brought her hands to her face, nodding rapidly. Yes. Yes, of course. My mother's house. It is family property. Trent drained the liquid cash from the estate, but the deed is still in the family trust. We will go to New York. We will rebuild. I stood perfectly still, letting them construct this fragile, pathetic lifeboat out of sheer desperation. I watched them cling to the memory of my grandmother, the only woman in this family who had ever shown me genuine love, a woman whose legacy they had willingly handed over to a con artist. You cannot go to the brownstone, I said softly. The words stopped their frantic planning instantly. Chloe turned to me, her upper lip curling into a vicious sneer. Shut up, Maya. You do not get a say in this. Chloe spat, her false bravado returning. You might have your little federal badge, but you do not control the family trust. Big Mama left that house to Mom. It belongs to us. We are moving there tomorrow, and you are not getting a single key. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and pulled out a crisp folded piece of paper. I took my time unfolding it, ensuring the heavy silence in the room stretched until it became agonizing. Big Mama left the house to the family trust. I corrected my tone, conversational, devoid of any anger. And Mom, in her infinite wisdom, gave Trent full, unmitigated power of attorney over that trust so he could manage your investment portfolios. Denise froze. Her eyes darted from my face to the paper in my hands. Trent did not just drain the cash accounts. I continued stepping closer so they could clearly hear every single syllable of their destruction. 6 months ago, when his offshore liquidity started drying up, he took out a massive unregulated shadow mortgage against the brownstone to cover his margin calls. He leveraged Big Mama's house to the absolute limit, and when the federal task force froze his primary accounts, he defaulted on that mortgage. Chloe stopped breathing. Marcus let out a low, agonizing groan from the floor. The bank foreclosed on the property 6 weeks ago, I stated, dropping the final undeniable truth into the center of the room. You lost it, Denise. You lost the house you grew up in. You lost the last piece of generational wealth this family had. You handed it to a criminal because you liked the brand of his watch. Then we are homeless, Denise wailed, her legs giving out completely. She collapsed onto the floor, burying her face in her hands, her wails echoing off the high ceilings. We have absolutely nothing left. Actually, the property was sold in a private closed-door bank auction exactly 1 month ago. I said, my voice cutting through her sobs. Denise snapped her head up. Her tear-filled eyes widened, a sudden desperate spark of hope igniting in the darkness. She looked at me, realizing I had known about the auction. The pieces clicked together in her frantic mind, but they formed the wrong picture entirely. You bought it, Denise gasped, pushing herself up onto her knees. Maya, you bought it back. You saved Big Mama's house from the bank. Oh, thank God. Thank God you had the money. We can still go there. We can still move in. I looked down at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had spent 3 decades making sure I felt entirely unwelcome in her presence. I did not save the family home, I said, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. I bought my home. Denise's smile vanished instantly. I purchased the property using my own capital entirely legally through an anonymous limited liability company that I am the sole proprietor of. I explained, looking directly into her terrified eyes. The deed is exclusively in my name. The locks have already been changed. It is no longer family property. It is my private residence. You cannot do this! Marcus gasped from the floor, his face turning an explosive shade of purple. We are your parents. You cannot leave us on the street. You have to let us move into the brownstone. I slowly shook my head, my expression carved from stone. I do not have to do anything. Chloe scrambled forward, grabbing the hem of my trousers. Maya, please! She sobbed, her pride finally shattering. I have no money. Trent drained my personal accounts. My credit cards are declining. I cannot go to a shelter. I cannot be homeless. Please let me come with you. I stepped back, forcing her hands off my clothing. I looked from my sister to my father and finally to my mother. You spent your entire lives investing in your golden child, I said, my voice ringing with absolute unyielding finality. You funded her vanity. You protected her ego. You sacrificed my father's equity, my grandmother's legacy, and your own retirement just to maintain her fake royalty. You made it abundantly clear that she was the only daughter that mattered. I gestured down at Chloe, who was weeping pathetically on the floor. Well, it is time for your premium investment to pay off, I declared, looking Denise dead in the eye. You wanted the elite lifestyle. You wanted the perfect daughter. You have her. Chloe can figure out where you sleep tomorrow night, because you are never stepping foot inside my house. Camera action. A slow, deliberate tracking shot begins. The camera locks tightly onto Maya's face in a close-up profile as she turns sharply on her heel. The expression on her face is entirely devoid of emotion, a mask of absolute chilling resolve. The focus is incredibly sharp on Maya, blurring the chaotic, tragic scene of the family wailing in the background. I did not look back. I did not pause to absorb their screams or their begging. I walked with measured, purposeful strides toward the shattered remnants of the front door. Agent Miller stood by the threshold, his posture rigid as he offered a sharp, respectful nod. Secure the premises. Agent Miller, I commanded, as I stepped over the splintered wood and out into the cool night air. Nobody takes a single piece of evidence out of this house. Understood, Agent Miller replied, tapping his radio. I walked down the illuminated driveway, ignoring the gasps and whispers of the neighborhood elite gathered on the sidewalks. I approached the sleek black government SUV idling at the curb. An agent opened the rear door for me. I climbed inside, sinking into the dark leather interior. As the heavy door closed shut, sealing me inside the quiet, secure cabin, I looked out the tinted window. On the command of the tactical team, the main breaker to the estate was violently severed. The brilliant, ostentatious lights of the grand house were instantly extinguished, plunging my parents, my sister, and their entire fake empire into absolute, inescapable darkness.